What if I told you that two women reporters solved one of America's most infamous serial killer cases while their own bosses and the police tried to stop them? And what if the real story behind the murders was even darker and more twisted than what you're about to see on screen? That's the disturbing truth hiding behind the 2023 Hulu film Boston Strangler. Today, we're going to break down the real murders, the brilliant journalists who cracked the case, and the shocking reality behind what Hollywood showed you. The killings that shook the city. Between June 1962 and January 1964, Boston became a city gripped by fear. 13 women fell victim to a predator who didn't break into homes, didn't force his way in. He talked his way inside. He posed as a repairman, a salesman, sometimes someone from a modeling agency. He would knock on doors and become part of the everyday world of these women before turning into something horrific. These weren't random attacks. They were calculated invasions of privacy that ended in death by strangulation, usually with the victim's own nylon stockings tied around their necks in a distinctive bow pattern. The newspapers started calling them the silk stocking murders. The victims ranged from Anna Sleesers, a 55-year-old woman found on June 14, 1962, to young Mary Ann Sullivan, only 19 years old, found dead on January 4, 1964, in her newly rented apartment, with a card beside her that read, "Happy New Year." Most of these women were sexually assaulted before they died. Some were beaten with such brutality that it seemed impossible one person could be responsible. But one person was being blamed. One person was confessing. One person was becoming infamous. Albert DeSalvo grew up in violence. His father was an alcoholic who beat his mother, his siblings, and his entire family. His childhood wasn't just traumatic. It was shaped by a father who taught him to break into homes at age 5 and arranged his sexual abuse when he was 7 years old. By the time he was a teenager, DeSalvo was already moving through the criminal system. He was arrested for robbery at 12. He spent time in reform schools that were just as violent as the home he came from. The army became his escape. He was stationed in Germany, married a local woman named Irmgard, and came back to Boston ready to blend into normal life. But he couldn't. Before the strangulation murders began, DeSalvo was already known in Boston's criminal underworld. He called himself the Measuring Man. He would knock on doors pretending to be from a modeling agency, asking women to try on leotards so he could measure them. What he was actually doing was assaulting them. He was arrested, diagnosed as a sociopath, served 11 months, and then walked free. Not long after his release, the Strangler killings began. The journalist Loretta McLaughlin worked for the Boston Record-American when she started noticing patterns others ignored. Women were dying, and police treated each death as separate. The system was failing these victims. Loretta and her colleague, Jean Cole, decided to do what the police would not. They investigated. They connected the murders. They realized a serial killer was active in Boston, while law enforcement looked the wrong way. They named him the Boston Strangler. And that name stuck because two women did what men with badges should have done. The newspaper bosses didn't want the story printed. They worried about panic, profits, or any excuse to put money over truth. But Loretta and Jean pushed back. They published anyway. They wrote 29 straight articles. They faced ridicule from police detectives, harassment from a city that didn't want to believe them, and fear while chasing a killer with targets on their backs. Jean got phone calls with heavy breathing. Their families were harassed. This was no longer just journalism. This was women demanding to be heard in a system built to ignore them. In 1965, Albert DeSalvo was arrested for sexual assaults as the Green Man. He was held at Bridgewater State Hospital. There he met George Nassar, an inmate, a murderer, someone tied to what came next. DeSalvo confessed to Nassar about being the Boston Strangler. Nassar told lawyer F. Lee Bailey. Suddenly, the case seemed solved. Except it wasn't. It was a performance. DeSalvo could describe apartments, crime scenes, and details that seemed impossible to fake. But he couldn't provide physical evidence. Nothing linked him to the murders. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing but his words. The movie connection. The 2023 Hulu film Boston Strangler, starring Keira Knightley as Loretta McLaughlin, asks the question nobody wanted to ask out loud. What if we got it wrong? The movie shows F. Lee Bailey working with DeSalvo through the crimes, showing him photographs of the scenes, coaching him through details. It shows George Nassar claiming he was promised reward money, claiming he could split the profits from a book deal if DeSalvo confessed. It shows a system so broken that it was willing to accept a confession from someone who might have been just seeking attention, money, and notoriety. The film suggests that Daniel Marsh, a man with documented violence toward women and a history that placed him in areas where similar murders occurred later, might have been the real killer. It proposes that copycat murders happened after Marsh left Boston for Michigan. It questions whether multiple killers were responsible instead of one man. Reality check. The movie got a lot right. Loretta McLaughlin and Gene Cole really did investigate these murders when nobody else would. They really did coin the name Boston Strangler. They faced real sexism, real opposition, real danger for pursuing the truth. The victims were real, the dates were real, the terror was real. But the movie compressed timelines. It condensed years into months. The Michigan murders that Marsh potentially committed didn't happen until 1967 to 1969, years after the Boston murders stopped. DeSalvo was stabbed to death in Walpole State Prison in 1973. His murder was never solved. Multiple people were tried. Multiple theories exist. In 2013, DNA evidence finally linked DeSalvo to one victim, Marianne Sullivan, the youngest, the last one. But DNA did not link him to the other 12 murders. Not one. So, what do you think? Was DeSalvo really the Boston Strangler? Or is the story even darker than we know? If you found this breakdown interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.